So this is a special episode with Erin M. Evans, who was with us for the Sundering interview series. She did The Adversary, one of the middle books, the one with the female protagonist, the only female author really in that series. So she requested for us to interview her again for her newest book, Fire in the Blood, which is a sequel to The Adversary, and book 4 of her Brimstone Angels series. So this is Erin M. Evans. Her book comes out on October 14th, as we mentioned in the interview. That's worldwide. That's for Kindle and physical copies. And yeah, this is fascinating. She's one of the only female authors currently writing in the Forgotten Realms, and has one of the main female protagonists in the Forgotten Realms. So big that they allowed her in the Sundering Mega Event series. So without further ado, here's our interview we just did with, actually literally just did like a couple minutes ago, with Erin M. Evans, author of Fire in the Blood, the upcoming novel in the Brimstone Angels series featuring Faraday. So welcome back to the show, Erin. And one thing I like to say is thank you for asking for us to come back, because usually we're the ones pestering people if we can come again.
Not a problem. It was fun last time.
So, of course, you're back to talk about the next book in your part of the Forgotten Realms. I don't know if I want to call it Forgotten Realms series or just your story to tell. That book, of course, is called Fire in the Blood.
Yes.
And one thing I want to say right off the bat is, when I was starting this book, I was quite pleased and surprised that not only is it a sequel to your previous book, but it's also in many ways a sequel to Troy Denning's The Sentinel.
Yeah, that was it was sort of the trickiest part, and in a way it was a lot of fun to kind of fit it in there, because we had kind of a loose document for the what happens in the world during the Sundering, that as we created things, we kind of say, okay, this is nailed down and I need this to change. But when you kind of come in almost on top of someone else like that, there's a lot more pieces that are like, no, that can't move. The Siege of Marsember is going to happen, and it's going to happen in this month. But what was fun about it is that my characters are in a different city, and so when they see this happening, they don't know everything that Troy's characters know. They don't actually know everything the readers know. So you get kind of a little bit of a dramatic irony in some ways. But you get to kind of play off those expectations and understandings and sort of shape a bigger story just by having that piece to play off of.
So was it a little easier to write this one, knowing that you had a bigger chunk of time to write it, as in like you weren't as locked into certain parts of the timeline?
It's actually harder for me. I usually all of my previous books have happened, the story happens pretty quick. In I think in the biggest case it was like it takes a month. So this one is I think 6 months, 6 to 9 months. I'm not 100% sure on the dates anymore, but so there's a lot of time to fill, and you don't want to just kind of put all the boring stuff in. But I tend to give my characters problems that usually I like to give them problems that they have to solve. That like it's just too pressing. So there was a little bit of a shift that I had to do to make them things that took longer to solve, or to make them things that built in their sort of pressingness. But it was a good experience. I think the only thing is it's a really big book, and part of the reason is that having to work with that timeline. But it ended up, I think, working really well.
So this was the first time you've actually done a story that takes place over a larger period of time rather than just a shorter, intimate story?
Yeah, that's the first one.
Wow. You did a pretty darn good job for having more time to breathe, I should say.
Oh, thank you. I thought
So, well, at least was it nicer to have you... The last book was more dour in tone, because the entire series was going pretty dark. Was it nice to have more of a classic fantasy adventure feel for this one that's not as necessarily dark?
It was a good shift. I think what's interesting to me is that the Adversary, when I was writing that, it is very much about dealing with depression, and Shar as a metaphor for depression. And so this one is sort of like the characters have gone through that, really intense depressive episode. They've beaten Shar on a certain level, but she's still there looming in the background, right? So this is sort of like moving back into your life, and knowing that threat is there, and it's not going to just disappear. So it was fun to be able to put a little more silly stuff in, and have that be little less of a comic relief kind of feeling against that darkness. But I don't know, I like doing a big range. So I think, book to book, the mood's going up and down in a way.
And then in the last one, you had there was a lot of cat fighting between sisters. Well, this one is cat fighting between not sisters, but rivals in the similar sort of way.
I object slightly to the word cat fighting, because I think that in the last one, Havilar had she had a good reason to be mad, right?
Yeah, she had a good reason. Yeah.
And I think in this one it's similar. You have a sort of quote unquote love triangle that's really a big old mess, because while Havilar was gone, Bryn became engaged to the Princess of Cormyr, Rhaedra, and they like each other, like they enjoy each other's company to some extent. They respect each other, but they're not in love. This is entirely political. And but because of the pressures on both of them, breaking that engagement is really fraught. And so you have a lot of kind of machinations around whether or not she marries Bryn, and they're not entirely about what Rhaedra wants. And I think, I don't know, I like writing about relationships. I like writing about women sort of kind of grabbing hold of their own story. And what I liked about that sort of, again, love triangle, I keep making quotes around it because I think it's sort of silly to frame it as a love triangle, since it's not. It's sort of a relationship triangle, I guess. What I liked about it is I think you come into that kind of story and you're like, okay, I like Bryn and I like Havilar, which means I hate Rhaedra. And it means that Rhaedra is there to make Havilar look good. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to come in and take that expectation that you're going to go, well, she's just a bitch, right? And shift it. So because I would hope you see in the story, like, that for everything she's done that seems kind of, nasty, I guess, she has a really good reason. And having, like, having her kind of come to terms with what Havilar means to Bryn, and Havilar, kind of come to terms with what Rhaedra means to Bryn, and then Bryn come to terms with, like, who do I want to be here? I don't know. I found it really fun to write.
I think one thing that helped me sort of trust the character in a way would be the faith that her father had in here at the very beginning. Like, in the prologue, it's set up that he trusts certain people.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that trust, it kind of helps through the rest of the book.
Yeah, I like playing with that father sort of child relationship, right? Because on one hand, these are his heirs, and these are the most important people to him in the world, and he does trust them. At the same time, they're his children. And, once you're a parent, you start thinking about that. Like, this is my little baby, but so at some point he's going to be an adult, and how hard is it going to be to kind of let him go and do his thing? And especially if you throw into the mix, like, and you're inheriting a country. It's interesting to think of how complicated that would get for someone.
How long after the siege that's in Denning's book, The Sentinel, does this book take place?
So it actually takes place beforehand. The siege happens in the last third. It comes up. Okay. And then you see sort of what the entirety of that siege is like, because in Denning's book it's just the beginning and then they get out, right? So you kind of see how that siege builds up, how it shifts, because they're watching it develop, right? They're watching this army come through and trying to guess what they're going to do, and they don't know. And I think if you look at a map of Cormyr, the idea that they would just zip over to Marsember, which is sort of, it's a little out of the way. It's hard to get to if you don't go through Suzale. But this is one thing I like too, playing with the Shade Army, that they've got, like, so much terror on their side. They're the big scary army of darkness. And so the general leading them, Lady Marshina, is just this master of psyops in a way. Like, she's intentionally trying to make everybody in Cormyr so scared that they might just surrender as soon as she shows up. Yeah,
and last time I got to see the prince of the Shades, and he was pretty awesome.
Yes,
he was more assassin than a general. So, okay, that explains it. Because at the very beginning of this, I was like, well, they recovered quickly.
That's why date lines are super important.
Yeah, because I keep on looking at those date lines, and sometimes there's, I don't know, I remember, I think it was Salvatore's book, The Companions, where they really jumped around, and you had to really look at him going, which year is this? Because his first book, they jumped so much back in, it was sometimes 100 years. It's, whoa. Okay, so that clears it up, because I got references, what you were mentioning, but then I was like, I thought this has already happened. Okay, so that explains. I just need to look at a giant poster of the date.
Just you do the timelines as they overlap. This purple one is Fire in the Blood, and this orange one is the Sentinel, and.
And then one thing I've also noticed is Forgotten Realms is selling this as book 3 of Brimstone Angels. So it follows Brimstone Angels.
It's actually book 4. Just.
Okay, because it says book 3 on some of the sites, and then I was like, this has to be a book 4, because without the Adversary, this makes no sense.
Oh, I'll have to track those sites down and see if they'll fix it. Yeah, the problem I have run into is that people, when I wrote Lesser Evils, they tagged it as Brimstone Angels, Lesser Evils, because that was going to be the style for the entire series. Then the next one would have been Brimstone Angels, the Adversary, right? So sometimes people miss that Lesser Evils exists, because it just kind of looks like here's 2 different versions of Brimstone Angels. And it was, I wrote that book when they were starting to ramp up the Sundering release, and it kind of got buried a little bit. So I run into people occasionally who read Brimstone Angels and then The Adversary, and I'm always like, why did you not just mail me back The Adversary with curse words on it? Because you must have been so confused. You can jump in at The Adversary, and I think you're fine if you're a pretty close reader. But if you read Brimstone Angels and then read The Adversary, and you're being introduced to Dahl doesn't appear in Brimstone Angels, Tam doesn't appear in Brimstone Angels, or he appears in Brimstone Angels, but he's not leading the Harpers and stuff. So you have all these points, and then you get into Adversary, and there's sort of this expectation that you know these guys. Like, why are you not incredibly frustrated? You must be really good at context clues.
Yeah, I started with Adversary, then I went back. But Adversary is a good place to start, because you don't overwhelm them, and actually, I guess everyone's books in the Sundering kind of all, you could start there, and it worked well.
That was the goal. Like they said, if you're going to pick up an existing character, remember this is an entry point. We want to bring people back to the realm, so it's not just for fans of your series. You need this to be for new readers too, which was, because I had that 8-year time jump, was a little tricky, but I was really committed to making it work.
I think the hardest ones for me to, as far as missing stuff, would be Salvatore's one, because I had read Drift's books until a point, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, all this stuff happened that I have no idea what he's talking about. And then a little bit with Greenwood's at the end, but that's because I had also read Elminster to a point, and then
I think that's sort of the danger zone. It's the same thing as you read Brimstone Angels and then you read The Adversary, right? If you don't have a little of knowledge, and then you're like, I feel like I should know this, instead of ooh, and what's that, right? I don't know. I think that's sort of the cross point in the Venn diagram. This is the tricky audience.
Yeah, but it does work. The trick with the Forgotten Realms is there's so many books and so many things you have to work with. Who do you want to reference? What do you want to talk about here? Not overwhelming them, because you can have an entire book of reference.
Oh, and in Cormyr especially, I read a lot of back material, but then I also had this designer / Cormyr superfan expert, Brian Cortijo, who had written several articles for Dragon about the royal family. And so I felt like I needed to contact him, and, because he created Raedra and he created Barovus, and Ospra. And I said to him, I'm going to do this. I basically said, I'm going to do this. I just, I'd like your blessing, and I'd like, more information. So for a lot of those things, it was like, hey, what would I call the person that would be yelling at Bryn if he didn't show up for his military duty stuff, and all those little details, and you can fall down the rabbit hole so fast. There's a point in the book where the date that I happen to have this scene happen on was a holiday in Suzale called Chase the King, where they take a convicted convict, like someone who's sentenced to death, and they dress them up in kind of like this crazy king from years past, and they have to like run around the city very lightly armed, and if they survive until sunset, they get their freedom. And then they're just like, this is the most insane holiday. But it
sounds like something you'd have in like the Baldur's Gate games, and
right?
you'd have to survive it as a level, and it'd be terrifying because that game's hard.
Right? It's like, all right. But to have that happen and have the characters not kind of comment on it would be, I think, weird. Unfortunately, like that's something that the characters who are from Waterdeep see, and they really tend to view Suzale through most of the story, the Capital Premier, as being kind of weird and stuck in the past and a little kind of like he looks out the window at these kids running around going, chase the king, chase the king. And he's like, this is just the most barbaric crap I've ever seen. Because I think you'd have that tension, you know, it's that sort of, even if you get down to like a New York, LA thing, right? There's two big cities and you're always going to assume yours is the best. And in this case, they just happen to have some crazy, crazy customs to back up your assertion.
So you also used the Harpers, and one thing I didn't ask you last time is you've utilized the Harpers a lot in your books. For reference for Harpers, where do you usually go the most? Do you actually go to specific authors because there's Harper series? There's also use them a lot in the games. Who is the go-to source for Harper stuff?
Well, so what happened with Lesser Evils is that rewind back to book 2, they actually asked me, they said, we're doing this kind of push with the Zhentarim, we want to kind of make the Zhentarim a little stronger, and alongside that we want to kind of bring the Harpers back to prominence, and they said, can you write this book? And I pulled out the 4th edition materials, which had the Harpers kind of get pushed back into Everland and really focused on defeating Shade. And I said, okay, I want to, you said this, so I want to take this and extrapolate. So we say, okay, this group is now kind of pulling in all these sort of career spies and people who are really skilled at spycraft, because at this point they're sort of almost a resistance movement, and now they're sort of growing out and they're picking up on different threats and stuff. And I used the old Code of the Harpers game book for sort of like the structure, because I think they'd have to be very serious about breaking the code. Like in Adversary, you know, there was a lot of that with Farah, who was a different Harper. But then there's this complication because at the same time Ed Greenwood was writing his Sage of Shadowdale books and had Storm Silverhand going around and sort of organically like bringing the Harpers back in the Dale lands and in Cormyr. And so now you have these two factions of Harpers. And it's one of those lovely things where it's like it happened because, you know, there was some shifts in who was editing what, and there was a little miscommunication. And so now you have these two resurgences of Harpers happening. But it's kind of cool because now you have this point where they kind of knock heads occasionally. Like this is really anathema to how Tam thinks you should do things. But you don't just go up to Storm Silverhand and say, stop doing what you're doing.
You don't do that.
It would be really goofy. So, you know, I've read the old Harper series. I really like Elaine Cunningham's books, and I feel like when I read her Harpers, I have a little more sense of a structure behind them, even if they're kind of all doing their own thing. And so the Harpers of Waterdeep, which is sort of what I loosely call them, my sect or my organization, they are more structured. There is sort of a method in which you report your information so that they can make sure everybody who needs it has it. But yeah, I tend to gravitate more towards the spy-y kind of versus the kind of ranger in the wilderness going up to the farmers and gathering the information.
So one question from a fan before we talk a little more about your book, they wanted to know is there a city, a specific city, you know, such as a Baldur's Gate or an Am or other ones that you have not yet written in that you would love to tackle?
Oh, there's so many. The book I'm working on right now is set in Jerd Thymar, which is the capital of Tymanther. And with all the Sundering stuff, you can guess there's going to be some craziness. I'm looking at my map so I can kind of Yes. I have to admit, I think Calumport is really interesting. And, let's see. I'd love to go back to Neverwinter. I really liked Neverwinter. And you know what? Down in, I think Estegund is really interesting. I know that's like way off the map for most people. It's kind of way down in the south. Originally it had kind of like an Indian, Near Eastern kind of feel. And then they had it kind of overrun by Rakshasa. So how that switch happens. And I have this sort of tentative fascination with Mulhorand and like Skuld. I actually in a former life was very determined to go into Egyptology. I was really interested in the early dynastic period and the development of religion there. So Mulhorand is sort of one of those things I have like a love-hate relationship with. I think it frustrates me how simplified it gets, but then at the same time I'm like, but if you just let me hold it for a minute, I could make it so crazy. And what else? I think Narfell is really interesting too, but the Narfell and Danmara are the settings for a trilogy I worked on when I was an editor, Mark Sehestet's The Chosen of Nenduin. So I think I would leave that one for him.
So I guess one quick kind of offshoot of this one is now that the Sundering is done,
mm-hmm.
We've gone through all the Sundering. Which event in the Sundering could even be in your own novel? Which event in the Sundering got you most excited to want to write something adding to that?
So this is where it's a little bit tricky because the Sundering is done as sort of a marketing event, but the books are still in that time period. We haven't all moved through to the end to where like 5th edition begins, basically. So the War in Cormyr is something where I was really excited to write about that when I kind of had I was reading that sort of history of the Sundering when it was first drafted, and I asked if I could. I realized that if I did something, it would make I don't want to spoil it, just in case anybody's read it. If I did something, it would make things really hard for Bryn. And I found some interesting ways to twist it, and with that, I kind of envisioned this final battle scene and got really excited about that. I'm really psyched to deal with Timanther. I think we've got something really cool cooked up for that area and the old kingdoms and stuff. But I'm still writing it, so it's kind of it's tricky to say like, oh, it's this, especially because when you're working on something like that, you're never 100% sure unless someone else has already written it and said, no, this happened. What you're going to end up having to shift to make the story work.
So you mentioned how in this book, and now that I know it's there, it's kind of obvious. This takes place alongside other books and events that happen in the Sentinel and so on take place during this book, and you kind of see from a different point of view how it's happening. Are you allowed to write, say, I'll just do it with the most famous character, but are you allowed to write where you say run into Drizzt or see Drizzt doing things in books, not you control, but like for example, if your character saw something that happened with his friends in the Companions or the sequel books, would you be allowed to do that as long as it didn't affect that story?
Potentially. They are really respectful of authors sort of ownership over their characters within the novels. So if for example, Drizzt came to Jared Symar for some reason, it would make sense for my characters to be like, hey, there was a drow here, that's crazy. And I would probably go to Bob and talk to him about, what would be okay. I would send him those scenes. And I mean, that's something I did with the Adversary, that there's actually sort of a reference or crossover point for all 5 books in the Adversary. And so with those, I would send the guys those scenes. Like when Serge is talking about what happened with Mephistopheles, I said that to Paul. I'm like, does this feel accurate? Does this feel like the kind of gossip people would have about Mephistopheles? And with Stead, the chosen of Lathander that's in...
Yeah, and Byron.
Yeah, exactly. So he's in the internment camp, right? And so the scenes where he's got dialogue, I sent that. And I said, does this sound like him? And just to make sure that it all felt right. And I think it would have to be, and it is in all those cases that it's something that has to happen, right? It doesn't really make sense for Mephistopheles to have failed that hard and for nobody in the hells to be talking about it. So I really kind of needed to reference it in a way. Some of them are just fun. I think at one point Dahl makes a kind of snarky comment and name checks Elminster. So, there's a range of those, but just generally, it's the thing where it's like, do you need to do this? Does this feel natural, or is it just kind of a little wink and a nod? And then what are you going to do? I would never take Dritz and try to give him like dialogue or something. It would just be, that would be weird.
So how much, I know we've talked with Ed about it, and he said basically anytime Wizards has questions about anything, they just call him and say, "What's this?" But before you were an editor, if I remember correctly, and now you're a writer, how much influence how much as a resource do you all in general use Ed Greenwood for?
I use him probably. I feel bad how much I use him actually, because the thing is that the questions that I send Ed are things like, the book I'm working on right now, I'm like, I need a wood that you could carve something out of that would be located around, Anther Timanther, and that would be something kind of like koa wood, where it's pretty firm, pretty hard, and very attractive. So what would that be? It's still sort of like weird nitty-gritty details that maybe appeared once in a Volo's guide, back in second edition, and never again, or like a dragon article. I can go to Wizards and say, hey, I need to know about this, and they can send me all the references on that. But it's hard when you need, like if I were saying I need to know about Luscroll root, which is the answer Ed eventually gave me, they could totally find all the articles where it gets mentioned. They have a big database of scanned items for this purpose. But if I need sort of to work backwards into it, what does someone who lives in the Dales call their grandmother, because you don't say ma'am in the realms, right? So that's the kind of thing that Ed is really good for. And I always have to make sure, though, that I remind him, like, tell me what's already there, like what you've already invented, because if there's nothing there, you don't need to do that for me. I will do that. That's fine. But if I can make a little reference in here that I want to do that, I want to make sure the world feels consistent, even if it's just for like one guy who's read all the articles in memory, even if it's just for Ed, right? Like that, I do want to do that. But he's kind of amazing, because you can ask him something and you're thinking, no way has he figured this out. For Lesser Evils, I was like, I want to find a place in the mountains near Waterdeep where you would find a really distinctive kind of granite that you could recognize and say, it's going to be in this section of the mountains. And he's like, oh, you want the nether mountains, and there's this kind of orbicular granite that's found in veins over here. And I was not expecting an answer for that, but of course he has an answer, right? He's got like every molecule set down.
Well, at least you have a reference for that. At least you have him available, because if he wasn't, well, I guess you could always ask Bob as well, because he knows a lot.
Yeah, honestly, if I were going to go up into the spine of the world in the Sword Coast, I would go to Bob instead of Ed, because that's sort of his playground, right? He's carved out this area, in the same way I would hope that if they wanted to know about, tieflings and warlocks, at this point, like I've carved out, or Dragonborn, right? Richard Lee Byers did a lot with Dragonborn, but now I'm doing so much with sort of other aspects of it that, that's the thing, is like you kind of go back to the same spot enough, and you kind of carve out enough of those little details that make it, like really make it feel like it's a real world that keeps going. And then, then you become the source book. I had someone ask me on Twitter the other day, like, do Dragonborn wear shoes? And I gave them this entirely too detailed explanation of what the bone structure of Dragonborn's feet is probably like, with the caveat that I'm not entirely sure how they manage bipedalism if their hallux is inverted. But I haven't figured that part out yet, but the rest of it.
It's amazing how much you, the writers in the Forgotten Realms, know, because we can get, some authors will just talk a little bit and talk, but like every single one of you, we can just start saying, talk about this, and you'll talk about it forever. Like I remember we got Jeff Grubb to talk about some obscure detail from like 30 years ago, and he just knew it. And he's like created everything, so I don't or been involved in creating everything, so I don't understand how he still knows, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I've always likened it to, I feel like before I ever got into this, I would have thought this was very easy, that they tell you write this and you're just writing a little fantasy adventure, but I think it's very akin to writing historical fiction, because you do have to do all this research on these details, like what is life like, because that material exists. You can't just, and when I was an editor, I found that our authors who had the hardest time writing this shared world fiction were the ones who didn't kind of click into that mindset, who were sort of like, oh, I need to know, how long do Dragonborn, how long are they gravid? How long do they gestate, right? I'm just going to make something up. And it's like, well, no, stop, because, we've established these things, and that means this is true. And if you just say some random number, then now we have we have a disconnect, right? And if your first instinct is, I don't know this answer, let me see if someone else does. Not so much to say, hey, do my work for me, hey, be creative for me, kind of thing, but just make sure that there what information already exists out there. I think those are the people who kind of get into this the most. When you get kind of obsessed about those details and making sure that it feels like someplace you could just step into.
So if you still have some time, there's one line of discussion which we'd like to talk about.
Okay.
That we haven't yet. You mentioned Elaine Cunningham, and I have a lot of friends who love fantasy and reference her, and I think Novak as well as early Forgotten Realms writers who they always respected and loved because they brought the females into the realms and brought female readers into the realms. And now, when we talk to writers and people involved in the realms, they pretty much all reference you.
Oh.
So what's it like being like if to many people, the torchbearer for the female reader and the female protagonist in the realms, picking it up from people like Elaine Cunningham?
I mean, it's really amazing to have people appreciate that aspect of the writing. I think the thing I have found most interesting is that, sometimes when I talk to like marketing people, they assume like my readership must be, it's all the women, but it's not. It's pretty well split. That they have this audience, like that men who read in the realms want to read about women too. So I think the unfortunate thing is that at the moment, I'm the only woman writing in the realms, and I'm the only one who's a sort of iconic character. I mean, the other authors have important characters. You have Catti-Bree, and you have Arietta, and you have Storm, and you have Amarune. But I'm the only one who has this sort of iconic female character, and I'm hopeful that there are more of us, in the future, that there are more characters and more writers. But that it's one of those things is that I kind of just write. I didn't set out to write like I'm going to write the great female characters. I just want to write really good characters, and these are the characters that speak to me, and making sure that all these different voices appear in the story is. I mean, that's what I want. I want to make it feel real, and to do that, you have to think about everybody in a sense.
So, Fire and Blood is, as we've corrected, book 4 in Brimstone Angels series. It follows the Adversary and so on. Is the book you're currently working on book 5 in Brimstone Angels?
It is, yeah. I'm currently contracted to write 6 books in the Forgotten Realms. So I have sort of one 6-book arc, which is, the sort of the plotty part of that arc is dealing with Asmodeus. So at the end of book 6, you should have the 5th edition status quo established. And then, for future, well, you never know, right? We'll see.
Yeah, well, I'm just surprised that it's all one series, because a lot of people like, say, a trilogy here, a duology here, a single book here. They might use the same character, like, Drizzt has like 8 trilogies.
Yeah.
And so it's nice that you're actually continuing on one one long arc for 6 books, because most people don't try that. That's kind of scary for some writers.
You know what's funny is I think it's because I watch so much television. It's structured like a TV drama in a way, but you've got each book is sort of an episode, so that it's got its own little story, its own little conflict, its own plot, and then you have sort of the bigger story of, you know, the season, so to speak, and that, you know, as it goes on, as it builds, that becomes more what the episode is about. For when I started writing this series, they said what they wanted to do more things like Elminster, where you have a character who goes through, you know, many books, as many as people want to read. So I didn't set out with like a trilogy structure in mind, and I think that helps too. I think, you know, if you read the Drizzt books, sometimes the trilogy is sort of like, it doesn't feel like it's actually what the structure of the story is. It's just like, these are labeled as a trilogy. Because that's what you do in fantasy. You have trilogies. But it is sort of this, I'm not actually even sure what he's up to now. Is it 25, 27?
It's in the 20s. I just got his most recent book to read. Once I finish the last 50 pages of yours, then I have to go to his.
So yeah,
it's a lot of.
the two of those being so close together is that's new. I think they haven't done that ever, but Random House says it's a good idea. So
how long did this book that's coming out it comes out October 14th, and you know, how long did this one take you to write?
I wrote it a lot faster than any of the other books because, I mean, when you're writing like tie-in fiction, when you're writing work for hire like this, you're a little at the mercy of the deadlines that the publisher wants. And Wizards they're very sensitive to, like, you know, can you do this? They're not like, just do it. But I had the opportunity. Adversary came out in December. Traditionally, December is not a great month for sales. So there's only, you know, even when it does well, like, you're never going to knock it out of the park kind of thing. But so they said, you know, we really love these books. We really believe in these books. We want to move them up into a better month. And so it was originally supposed to come out in September, but I needed till October to finish it. So I lost 2 months of writing time, 2 months in the end of writing time, compared to working on other books. So it was probably about 10 months to write the whole thing.
Nice, because I'm always amazed how fast some people work. Because, you know, some people take 10 months to a year. Some people like George R. R. Martin take 8 years. And then some people pump out books like every 3 months. And I don't know how. Like, I guess once you're in the groove, you can just keep on going. I guess
it helps that, like, I do this kind of part time. I just write, and then I take care of my son. He plays with his grandmother or his aunt in the mornings, and I write. And I have found ways to make myself not slow down. So that's helped. But I mean, I don't know how to write any faster than this. And I never feel like I'm that fast because of authors like Richard Lee Byers can write a book in like a month. I know Eric Scott to be, I think, wrote a book once in 2 weeks, and I'm never ever going to be that fast. But it's mostly, yeah, this is like for that time frame, this is all I think about. I'm really obnoxious as a dinner guest while I'm working on a book.
So last question. If fans still have questions about your novel Fire in the Blood, which comes out again October 14th everywhere, I believe that's in Europe and the US at the same time, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And it's e-reader and physical copy, October 14th. If they have more questions, how can they get in contact with you? What are you going to be doing to further promote your story over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I am doing a Reddit AMA on the 21st, so that's a great place to ask more questions. You can always find me at my website, slushlush.com. And if you are in the Seattle area, we are actually doing a release party at AFK Elixir's Meadery in Renton as a public event, so you can come on by, get your book signed, and yeah, ask me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me.
I look forward to your next book because I need to read it.
Well, thank you.
I guess that'll be next year sometime.
Yes. Definitely.
I look forward to it because I want to know what happens next.
Great. I'm glad.
So, thank you so much, and I guess you have either more writing or promoting to do?
Yeah, I actually have to do another Skype interview in 10 minutes.
Okay, so we'll let you have your bathroom break and see your son or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thanks, you too.